All right, guys, on this series, number 1 episode, we will be talking suspension geometry, front end. There's a lot that goes into it. There is a lot of math, there is a lot of time, and a lot of consideration. And you have to do it right the first time so you don't end up going down the road and having issues where you don't have enough adjustment later in the future. This is Dalton Ryan's Valiant, and he had a suspension put on, and it was, we're gonna call it subpar. It was working, kind of, but there's a lot of things that we can improve on. And after talking with Mike, his dad, we decided to just go ahead and cut the entire thing out and start over and just reuse the parts, the upper control arms, lower, and springs and shocks. So you could think of this as if you're gonna upgrade your car to a Mustang II style front suspension, this is the video for you, or this is the series for you. I'm gonna cover everything that I know about it and hopefully portray it in a way that is digestible, and I hope you guys can enjoy it. The first thing we really have to do though is we have to go through all the things you gotta do before you even start. Before you make the first cut, before you do anything, there's a few things you have to measure and think about. So let's, you know, I need to figure out a way to be able to talk. Tell you what, I'll be right back. I think this will do. Shit. All right, be right back. Perfect. That'll work. Also got markers. You guys can't see that at all, can you? Shit. Be right back. I think I got everything this time. All right, let's get started. All right, 6 things that you need to address before you make any cuts when you're upgrading a front suspension. I don't care if you're changing the style or not. These six things need to be taken into consideration before you start the project because they're gonna dictate how the project goes. The first 3 are super important before you cut anything because you won't know where they were before if you don't measure them prior. And you could guess all day, but the best thing to do is before you make a cut, go ahead and get at least these 3 done. The next 3 is something that you can take in consideration as the project progresses, but these 3 are super important. The first one's gonna be your ride height. And I take that from your frame rail to the ground. So imagine my crude drawings here, this is my truck over there. I would measure from the bottom frame rail to the ground, okay? And let's say that measurement is 6 inches. You know, I'm sure it's a lot less than that. I think mine's 3 inches, but let's say it's 6 inches for safety's sake. Then you also need to take a measurement from the center of the wheel to the ground as well. And you need to write that down. That's generally gonna be the size tire divided by 2, but you need to make a note of that so that you know. Because when you start setting your spindle height, you'll know that off your chassis height, all right? The next thing you need to know is your wheelbase. Wheelbase is measured from the center line of your rear axle to the center line of your front spindle. So that's gonna be that measurement. The truck, I believe, is 119 or something inches. That's gonna be super important to make sure that you get the wheel centered in the wheel arch, okay? Or at least how it was when it came into the shop. Unless you plan on doing something weird for drag racing, sometimes we stagger the front end, then you need to take that in consideration in the future. But still, let's just say simple basics, you need to measure the original, because a lot of the setback rules, it has to be within 2 inches or something. So take that in consideration, make sure you measure it now. The last thing that is very, very important is your track width. And I measure that with the tires off and to the outside edge of the rotors. That'll give me where the tire mounts. The reason I do that is if we were taking consideration for a different wheel type with a different offset, we can do the measurements from that to get your track width. So imagine this is the front of the truck, that's the grille, that's transparent tires in the front. You're measuring from rotor face to rotor face, from the outside edge to outside edge. I do not know the measurement on my truck, but I did narrow it. The front end, I did narrow it by a couple inches to get the tires to set up in the fender and still get turning radius. So those 3 things are what's really important before you do any cutting. The next 3 things you just need to think about. You could take measurements off the original if you're trying to go back to an original style. Most of the time, these guys that are probably going to be watching this are going to be upgrading to probably a Mustang II, or maybe even, I think Dodge Dakota has a front end. It's very similar, it has more adjustability. But you need to consider these 3 things, because as you either make these parts that you're gonna have to mount to the chassis, you need to make sure that whatever you decide on caster, camber, and toe, you need to be able to work that in your project and not run out of adjustment, because all these things need to be able to be just adjustable to get alignment, to be able to go straight down the track or around. So these 3 things I have to think about. On the caster, if you're going to go on the road or maybe a roundy round or figure 8 car, you're looking for 4 degrees-ish of caster, and that could be I use positive caster, so it's gonna be leaned back. I'll show that over here. On a drag car, you can get away with like 6 to 8 degrees. That's gonna keep the car wanting to go straight. And since we drag racers wanna go straight, it's a good thing to go ahead and make it a little bit more wanting to keep the wheel center. The one thing, trade-off to that though, is the higher the degrees of your caster, the harder it's gonna be able to turn going either at speed or even going slow, because it's gonna want to whip back. So take that in consideration. What you don't wanna do is have 0 degrees caster. It would be extremely unhandleable. It would try to wander all over the road. So you need at least 2 to 4 degrees minimum of caster. I'll explain what caster is over here. Camber is if you look at the cars, if you see a car that's been lowered a lot, you'll see the front tires kind of bend in like this or like that, or depending on how the suspension's made. That is your camber. I'll explain that over here as well. On drag cars, it's 0 degrees. You want straight up and down. Roundy round cars, sometimes they'll have some positive or negative camber depending on what direction they're turning on one side. So again, you need to make that to your application specific. The last thing is going to be toe. That's if your front wheels, I'll explain it over here, that the front wheels driving forward, most cars and most applications that I know of, you want a little bit of toe in, 3/16 of an inch toe in. As you're going down the track or at speed, the tires are going to want to pull out, and then you're going completely straight at 0. So 3/16 is kind of a general rule of thumb. So let's go over here and talk about what each one of those are real quick. The first is caster. This is going to be really hard to imagine, and I'm probably going to just have to put a picture up so you can see it. But imagine that this is your tire, and this line right here is the actual axis the tire sits on, or your spindle sits on. And I use positive degrees of caster. Positive degree is when it's leaned back. And this angle right here from 90 is your caster. How far the spindle is leaning backwards will dictate, kind of like a shopping cart wheel, all right? The next one is cambered, and again, imagine these being wheels. This is a cambered negatively, so the tire is inboard, and this one's a 90-degree camber. So you can imagine that's 90 degrees, so the tire's straight up and down. As a drag racer, this is what we're looking for. As a roundy round car, you may have that much camber. You may have 10 degrees, 20 degrees camber, be able to get around the corner faster. The last thing is toe, and that's going to be set up with the actual steering device, if it's a rack and pinion or if it's a drag link or anything like that. That's how you're going to set your toe. And this is very exaggerated toe, but this is the front going this way, and we want a toe in So the measurement from the center of the tire to the center of the tire, we want it to be, roughly 3/16 in. So that you measure the back, measure the back, and that's gonna give you your toe. And again, you want a little bit of toe in to keep it kind of, when it pulls out, to go straight. So these are the things that you have to decide or think about, or at least mark down before we get started. So we're gonna actually start looking at these three here. Before I can do that, I'm gonna have to take the front coilovers off so that I can get it down to ride height. There's no motor in this, so I'm gonna have to guess where the ride height was. One thing with the suspension, the Mustang II suspension, you have an upper and lower control arm. So that's a ball joint. There's your spindle. All right, actually this is the wrong way. Let's do it the right way so we don't screw this up for you guys. So imagine this is your spindle, ball joint, and you're gonna have your upper control arm mount is gonna be going down approximately 20 to 30 degrees, and you want your lower control arm to be parallel with the ground. So you want this at 0 degrees. So that is how I set them up, and I've had good success with this. The reason that you want this one to be downward is as you make a turn and the suspension gets loaded on the one side, it's actually gonna cause the tire to camber in, which is gonna give you more traction on the ground. So, and also almost all Mustang 2s are not parallel, or not equal length. So your top's always gonna be shorter than your bottom. Those type of things we'll get involved with more when we actually set up the suspension or get the design made. I'm half and half doing, I don't know if I'm gonna do round bar and get everything mounted to the round bar, or just use the CNC plasma to cut out some Mustang 2 style suspension and then tie it all together from the steering rack mount. So we'll have to decide that when we get there. I'm fairly certain I'm gonna lean towards using the plasma table. I think it's gonna give a cleaner look, and it's gonna be lighter than trying to add a bunch of tubes to make everything held. So this is what we're looking for. And these things we're gonna measure right now and start getting things cut apart. All right, I just got the car lowered down, got the coilovers off so we can get it down to ride height, since there's not enough weight in the front to push it down. I confirmed it was ride height with the owner, and now I am going to show you where I took the measurements from, what I measured, and one other extra thing that I measured just to check to see if we're gonna be improving Dalton's situation, and we are definitely gonna be doing that. So let me show you what we got. All right, as you can see, we're down at ride height on the ground. We took the coilovers off, and the coilovers are over there, and I'll explain what and why I did some measuring on those. But the first things first, I wanted to confirm that the original, they had it installed. I want to make sure that it was right. And if you can see that lower control arm right there, you see how it's parallel, roughly parallel to the ground? That's where I first lowered it to and checked the ride height, and again, the owner confirmed that it was right ride height. So the guys that originally installed this did have that parallel like it was supposed to. So good on them. Nextly, we'll talk about where I measured from. See if I can get you down here better, good enough. See that frame rail right up there? So I measured from there down to the ground. Okay. And over here, I measured from the back down to the ground. So I have two measurements, from the front of the subframe connector to the rear of the subframe connector. I've got two measurements over there. All right. Nextly, we measured the wheel base by laying a tape measure on the ground. And I've already done this in the back to line it up. And then you take a square and you square and plumb through the center of the spindle line. If you look down here, it's actually, if I get it correctly, it is 105 3/4. All right, this one's gonna take a little doing because I can't do it with just one hand. But on this one, I measured from the rotor face over to All right, so here's the measurements we currently have. These right here I'll talk about in just a second. These are the ones we talked about previously in the video here. Our ride height is 7 1/4 at the back of the rear of the subframe and 13 3/8 on the front. The wheelbase of this vehicle is 105 3/4, and the track width we just talked about. This is rotor face to rotor, not face, but disc rotor face to face, and then we have to add the actual hat value, which we'll get to that as soon as we get the tires off. Up here, I wanted to confirm what I thought was going on. And what I did was, before I took the coilovers out, I measured the actual eye-to-eye distance, and it was 13 inches. When I took the coilover out and I fully extended it, I actually had 14 inches. So that means he only had, because there's only 3 1/8 travel, he only had 1 inch of travel, basically, because he had 1 inch in the shock. So also with that, I measured the threads showing, which was 2 inches. So then when I put everything back together, I'll go back to this number on the threads for the adjustment for the coilover, and it should be pretty close to the weight, because I'm assuming he had this set up prior, for the 2 inches there. What we're gonna do is, instead of dealing with any of this, I'm gonna make sure that, since I have a shock that can go 14 inches fully extended with 3 1/8 inch travel, I'm gonna go 2 inches in the hole, which gives them 2 inches of travel to expand. So I need to mount it at 12 inches. I'm hoping that makes sense, but you'll see that more whenever we go into the fabrication part of it. All right, so I'm hoping that has halfway made some sense to you, and you see what I'm going at here or doing. I'll try to explain more and more the more detailed parts of it, but just know for now, this is the stuff that I'm just kind of finding out. What we're gonna do the rest of this video is, I'm just gonna tear off the rest of the front end, just get it. Now I'm not gonna say bare clean, but I'm gonna get all the A-arms off, get the wheels and tires, brakes, assembly, all that stuff off of there, so we can start CAD designing however we're gonna do this, whether it's gonna be tube or if we're gonna just make up something on the CNC machine. Either way, I have to CAD draw it, or at least draw it on some cardboard to figure out exactly how we're gonna mount this up. So let's get after it. Let's get the rest of this stuff torn apart, and I'll be back in just a sec. All right, I got everything off the car that's just bolt-on items. I really don't want to cut anything yet, because I'm going to use what's there to kind of guide my process to make it a little easier. Not to say that you couldn't do this without, just starting completely fresh. Absolutely could do that, but in my particular situation, I have some kind of guide to go off of. Now, I do need to move the spindles in board by 1/2 inch on each side, so 1 inch less track width. We talked to the owner about that. The tires looked like they were going to rub, especially when he was in full compression, so I'm just going to give him a little bit of extra there, just so he's not rubbing tires when he's making turns. Other than that, it's going to go back about the same where it was at, with the exception just done to a little higher standard. So let me show you everything broke down. So here you go. Here is the driver's side. This is that lower bar that held the lower control arm. This is the upper bar that held the upper control arm and the coilover. All that's getting cut out and replaced. The only thing that's going to be left is the original frame rail. I'm also going to be cutting off the old motor mounts, because we're going to end up mounting it in a different spot. And then obviously the rack will have to be dealt with, because I'm getting rid of all this, and this is where the rack was mounted. So we got a lot of work to do. Again, I don't want to cut any of that off until I have a better game plan about what I'm doing. It's just going to make it easier on me. Alright, with that being said, I'm hoping you found something interesting in this video. The next video will be me designing how I'm going to mount the control arms, and maybe even cutting the old stuff out. I'll try to be as detailed as I can. Make sure you leave a comment if there's something specific that you want me to address, but I'll try to be as specific as I can and not make it so boring that you don't want to watch. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Make sure you like and subscribe, comment down below, if I've done something wrong. Now's the time to do it, because I can fix it. But anyway, I hope the information that I gave you was beneficial, and we will see you on the next episode when we tackle more of the Valiant.